Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to Wood by Wright 2. Today we are making a pool cue, and this is kind of a traditional way of doing it, of shearing it down as opposed to turning it on a lathe. And I'm also doing a few things in here that aren't very traditional, like the octagonal handle. It just feels better in the hand, I like that. And also it has a horse butt tip on it because, well, I have a lot of horse butt lying around for some reason. But enough talking, let's actually dive into making this thing. I'm going to be making this pool cue out of red oak. I know that is a little bit unusual for a pool cue, but I've got a good bit of it sitting around, and it's the same wood that I used on the top of the table. So this is actually a nice piece for it. Fairly straight grain and nice and clean all the way down. So I need to actually cut this down. It is a piece about 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches, but I want to make diagonals to actually hold a cradle to cut the pool cue. And I have another scrap of red oak that was perfect for this, so I can cut it from corner to corner and make these diagonal triangle pieces. You'll understand that in a little bit. So I need to clean off the saw marks, and that means planing it down. Now these are longer than my bench. It's 6 foot long, so I actually pinch it between a dog and the wall on the other end, and that holds it in place while I can plane it, and then I can flip it around and do it from the other end. It means I'm going against the grain a little bit, but it's not a huge issue as these do not need to be perfectly smooth and clean. This is just making a jig to hold the pool cue. That way I don't have to set it up on a spring pole lathe that's 6 foot long. That would be an interesting time. So we need to glue these in place. It doesn't take much glue at all to hold them down. And glue them down, clamp them in place. And if you're in a rush or you just want to go quicker rather than using these clamps, you can just put in screws from the bottom. Holds it rather nicely. So I used a series of squeeze clamps every foot to 18 inches or so along here, held it in place. And it's basically, that's all I need for the gluing. I'm going to have one of these strips on either side so it creates a 90-degree cradle, each one running at 45 degrees, 6 foot long. I'm going to put a screw in one end as a stop. Later on I switched out that screw as it bent. Actually it didn't bend, it twisted in the wood and it wasn't quite as good. I thought a screw like that would hold, but not quite enough strength. So now we need to work on the cue itself. I want to mark off either end and then draw a circle. One end is 1/2 inch and the other end is the full width, 1.5 inches. And I was planning on making it all round at the beginning until I felt the octagonal. And every time I feel an octagonal handle, I love it. Now this is just a series of planing it smaller and smaller and smaller until you get down to the circles at either end. One end is 1/2 inch and the other end is, well, whatever size you make the other end. And I'm going to be using a scrub plane for most of this, as the scrub plane very quickly marches through material. And I think it was only about 40 minutes or so of actual planing to get this all down. I found using a clamp on one end or the other if I was working on the opposite end just held it in place a little bit better, made it a little easier to work with. Now to get that even taper from one end to the other, you start at the end where you want to take off a lot of material, and you take one little pass. And then you back up another foot farther and you take another pass. And then you back up another foot farther and you take another pass, and each progressive pass gets longer and longer and longer until the last pass is right at the beginning. And you'll notice that you get a really clean taper with that. Here you can see I switched over to putting a lag screw all the way through, and that held it perfectly. I wish I'd done that from the beginning. The nice thing about this setup is you can quickly and easily just rotate it and run to town on it. And so I'm going back and forth between the scrub plane and a jack. The number 5 will then run over all of the marks left by the scrub plane and smooth it out a little bit more, so you get a much cleaner taper from one end to the other. In between, every now and then, it's good to blow out all the extra chips as it gets really clogged up pretty quickly. And so I'm going to do this on all 4 corners of the square, and then I'm going to turn it 1/8 of a turn, as I now have an octagon on the back, and this will allow me to then taper it down a little farther because I'll have a square on the small end, and that square on the small end is half the size of what the original square was at 45 degrees. I hope that makes sense, but it's one of those complicated things. If you just think about it, each time you're going to turn it 1/4 of a time until you've gone all the way around. Then you're going to turn it 1/8 of a time, and then after that you turn it 1/4 of a time until you go all the way around. And that way you can get it down. You can see how it was a square on that end, and then now I'm turning that square back into an octagon, getting closer and closer to the end. Now, because this was the first time I've used it, the tapers on this end were too big. The plane was running into them, so I'm scrubbing them off right here. And I need to take them down to about 1/2 inch at the tip, so that the plane can actually get down to the work. Here you can see I've done 2 opposing sides down to the circle, and now I can flip it 90 degrees again and take down the other 2 opposing sides right down to the circle, and I'll end up with another square on the tip. And then I can turn it 1/8 of a turn and take off the corners on that square until I'm left with an octagon that is all the way end to end, nice and clean and with a good taper. It sounds like a lot of work, and it is a little bit, but it's not as much as you expect. It actually goes really quickly, especially with a good sharp scrub plane. It goes phenomenally fast. You can see I'm getting down close to the size, and I'll just be working along this, making sure I'm taking off even amounts all the way along it. Well, not even amounts, more at the tip than at the back. It's slowly working down. And yes, it was getting hot in the shop. Anytime I do a lot of scrub work, it gets hot, especially with the extra weight I put on recently. I need to take that off. Now that we've gotten the octagon, it is easier to come in with a spoke shave and then take off all the corners and turn it into a 16-agon. And then from that into a 32-agon, and then on from that from a 64-agon until it's basically circular. And sometimes you'll see me push it and sometimes you'll see me pull it. It just depends on the grain of the wood. Which direction the grain is running is which direction you push the plane or the spoke shave. And then in this, I'm going to use a French curve card scraper. And actually, DFM Toolworks just put out the curved set of card scrapers. So if you want one of those, I'll try and leave a link to that down below. They are phenomenal to use, and I'm looking forward to getting my set. This is just a cheaper one I have on hand, but you can never have enough card scrapers. And you can see when you sharpen ththese up really well, you get this beautiful curl coming off of them, and they are a lot of fun to use, especially in this shape where you get that curved curl. Just beautiful. So I'm going to work that up farther and farther, and I was going to do it the whole way down, but then I got about halfway and I thought, I like the feel of the octagon, so let's leave that alone. So it is rounded halfway and octagon on the back half, and it just kind of tapers in between the two, as you can see with that. So after the card scraper, it's basically done. You can test it, make sure there's no burrs, no splinters, nothing that's right onto. If you want to go into sandpaper, go for that. But it doesn't need much, if anything, after the card scraper. If it's sharp, that's what you need. Make sure that everything is square, make sure everything is straight and the way you want it. And the last thing I want to do is actually take a smoothing plane to the octagon circles. Originally, I was going to be rounding them out, and I was going to use the card scraper to clean them up. But because I have flat surfaces, I found it easier to put it in the vise and then run along them with my smoothing plane, a few passes on each of the 8 faces, and I end up with a really nice, clean, sharp surface it feels fantastic in the hand. And then you can see I flipped it around because, the grain's running the other direction, so it's just easier to flip the workpiece than it is to turn around and come from the other side. I just want to go over and make sure that all the corners feel good. I just knocked the corners off the octagon with a bit of sandpaper. Makes that just hold in the hand beautifully. I just want to put a little bit of a taper on the end here just to make it look a little better. A good sharp chisel does this very quickly, and I love the way these curls comes out. Just be careful when pulling the chisel back that you don't cut your finger on the edge of the blade. And keeping it sharp is phenomenal. This is the best way to get a good edge. Just keep a strop on the bench, and every now and then just come and give it 30 or 40 strokes, and then you come back, and it cuts. Yeah, I love that. These curls come off so cleanly and smoothly. It's just happy. And you get these beautiful curls coming out of oak, which is not an easy wood to work with. That makes me happy if you can't tell. Now, I've got that octagon on the end, and I want to clean it off a little bit, so the rasp actually does a really nice surface of that, and I thought, this might be a good place for my logo to go, and just put a little bit on the butt there. So we're going to use my brand that I made a while ago. And I've had a bunch of people ask me, how did I make the brand? And I actually had it 3D printed, and so I want to do a video here soon about making that. If that's something you'd like to see, let me know. It's a relatively simple process, and you can get different places online that'll actually print it for you. And then you can screw it in place. And so I can heat it up, put it on there, and we've got our mark branded on there. Happiness! Now we need to work on the tip of this. And it was a little bit rough, so I just decided to cut a bit off of the end, give myself a nice clean surface to glue to. That way everything bonds a little bit better. For the glue, I'm going to be using barge. If I had the time, I was going to heat up some high glue, but barge is there, and honestly I haven't seen much of a difference in strength between the two. Using a little bit of horse butt here, and so I can mark off the circle a little larger than it needs to be, then trim it down and get that ready to glue on. As you can see, here's the barge. You put a little bit on the leather, let that sit for a moment, put a little bit on the tip, push the two together, then pull them apart, and then let them sit for 3 to 5 minutes until they get tacky. And then once they get tacky, then you can put them together. One of the big mistakes that a lot of people put is that they put glue on the two, they put them on, and then they tape it in place, and it just doesn't hold as well. So I've let them become a little bit tacky, and now I can put it on there, and it basically holds itself. There really isn't a need for glue other than the fact that there isn't a need for tape other than the fact I want to work with it here pretty soon. So I'm just going to hold it in place for another 15, 20 minutes, and then I can come back in and shave it off. It really needs overnight to set to its strongest strength, but for what I'm doing, and I'm not actually going to be playing with it, it is perfectly fine right now. So I'm going to shear it off till it is flush with the outside, and then just come around and taper the tip just a little bit. And of course, then it holds the chalk. Happiness! I love the smell of pool chalk. That's, yeah, really good stuff. Oh, I forgot to put finish on this. Oh yeah, let's do that. Boiled linseed oil paste wax, because this is something that's going to be in the hand. It's going to be sliding through the fingers. I want that organic feel to it. There's very few things that beat the feel of just a simple boiled linseed oil and paste wax finish. And it goes on so easily. I have several videos covering how it goes on. It brings out the color and definition in oak just like nothing else will come close to that. And it feels phenomenal in the hand. So I wipe it on, let it soak. I'll put a couple coats of that on, and then I'll come back with paste wax and buff that in, and it is done. It's ready to use. Let's have a little bit of fun. And this is one of the most untrusted felts I've ever played on. This epoxy poured floor is sad. There you have it. I am in love with this thing, and I'm looking forward to actually going and playing a game with it and taking it to the pool hall and having people look at me and thinking, what in the world is he doing? Lots of fun. So there you have it, a pool cue. Now all I need is a pool table. I've got 3 sets of balls and another half dozen cues as well as other things, but I don't have a table. One of these days we'll get one. Maybe I'll make a table. That would make a good YouTube video. So let me know your thoughts down below. I'd love to hear them. I've thought about making this 2-part and cutting it in half and putting a screw in either side, but I really kind of like leaving it like this. It's a little longer than normal, and it's much heavier because I left the heft on this a lot larger. But I kind of like the feel of it, so it's something a little bit different. I'll have to play with it here soon. So yeah, let me know your thoughts. I'd love to hear them down below. Please like, comment, subscribe. That really does help out the channel. And I think that's about it for now. Until next time, have a wonderful day. So if you ever get in a line in England, that's called queuing up.